Okay, call the meeting, or special council meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Brenner?
Here.
Councilmember Fair?
Here.
Councilmember Vogel?
Here.
Councilmember Barnett? Here. Councilmember Stanko?
Here.
Councilmember Reeser?
Here.
Council President James?
Here. Okay, at this time, I will move the meeting over to our borough solicitor.
Thank you, President Jenks. This is the place and time designated by notice to consider the application of Wrangler Lot Operating LLC for a conditional use in accordance with section 502.d.1, section 504d.6.8, and section 505d of the Borough of Wyomissing zoning ordinance of 2010 as amended, and the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. The application for conditional use, if approved by the council of the Borough of Wyomissing, would allow a 30-unit apartment building without first floor retail, professional services, or a restaurant being provided, and would allow for a parking lot containing 32 off-street parking spaces instead of the required 45 off-street parking spaces. The property, which is the subject of the application, is located at 915 Penn Avenue, Wyomissing Borough, Berks County, Pennsylvania, in the Neighborhood Commercial District, Zoning District C1, and within Redevelopment Area Mixed Use Incentive Overlay District, Redevelopment Area 1. I should introduce myself also. I'm Chris Hartman, the solicitor for the borough. Before proceeding any further, I want to find out if there are any persons present who wish to be identified as parties to the hearing. Party status would give you the right to ask questions of the witnesses, to provide sworn testimony, and to appeal the decision of the Borough Council if you so wish. We will provide an opportunity for public comment for those persons who are present who do not choose to be parties, but that will not include the right to ask questions of other witnesses, and it will also not entitle you to the right to appeal. Of course, the applicant is always a party to the proceeding, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Haynes and ask him to, at least at this point, introduce his team.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. George Haynes, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions and Development for Equus Capital Partners. With me today, Eric Garton, our engineer from Gilmore and Associates, and my associate Keith Hans, Asset Manager, Vice President at Equus Capital Partners as well. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Haynes, who will be testifying today on behalf of the applicant?
I will be, and Mr. Garton.
Okay, very good. When we get to that part of the hearing, I'm going to ask both of you to be sworn.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Haynes. Is there any other person present here today who wishes to be recognized as a party to the proceeding? Yes, sir. Please.
Martin Deutschman.
I'm sorry,
Martin Deutschman,
can you spell for me?
Deutschman.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Deutschman, are you a resident of the borough of Wyomissing?
He owned 918, 932, 934 Penn Avenue.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us a mailing address so that we can deliver, if you are admitted as a party, deliver a copy of the written decision to you?
Yeah, 1800 North 12th Street, Reading 19604.
04.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Haynes, do you have any objection to Mr. Deutschman being recognized as a party to this proceeding?
I do not.
I would recommend to council that Mr. Deutschman be recognized as a party due to the proximity of his business property in the borough. Is that acceptable to council? Yes. Okay, seeing no objection from council or from the applicant, Mr. Deutschman, you will be recognized as a party to this hearing. Is there any other person present here today who wishes to be recognized as a party? Yes.
931 Penn Avenue.
Okay. Can you give us your name, please, ma'am?
Conchita
CONCHITA, Bron, B as in boy, RAUN.
And 931 Penn Avenue, is that where you live, or is that a property that you own other than where you live?
Right, there's a property that I own that my daughter has her practice there. It's doctor's practice.
Right, Family Medicine Associates, I'm Maria Braun, and I'm the daughter of Mrs. Conchita Braun.
Okay, so, Ms. Braun, are you the owner? Conchita,
Yes, I
you
am.
are the owner, okay. And the property that you own is 931 Penn
That
Avenue,
is
correct?
correct.
And may we have a mailing address for you as well?
Sure. 1101 Parkside Drive North in Wyomissing, PA.
Okay, very good. Well, Dr. Braun, just so we're clear in the record, you are not separately seeking party status.
No, I'm just accompanying my mother because, my practice is right in this.
But your mother is going to be the
She's
party.
the owner of the building, yes.
And we've been there for 25 years.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Haynes, again, do you have any objection to Conchita Braun being recognized as a party to this proceeding?
I did not.
Thank you. I'd recommend to council that Conchita Braun be recognized as a party to this proceeding. Is there any concern by council? No. Okay, seeing no objection by council or the applicant, you will be recognized as a party to the proceeding. Again, I'm going to ask, is there any other person present who wishes to be recognized as a party? I see no indication of that. So, we have identified the parties to the matter. I want to make it clear that anyone who wishes to offer evidence regarding this matter will be required to be sworn before testifying before council. We have some administrative things yet to complete. This hearing was advertised in the Reading Eagle. Notice was mailed to persons required to receive mailed notice. The property was posted with notice. And I'm going to turn to our borough manager, Michelle Bear, and can you explain what exhibits you have, including the information about the notices?
Do you want to swear me first?
Yeah.
Should I get everybody's one?
Okay, we could do that right now.
I couldn't see who was talking, so who's gonna be doing the testifying? Thanks. Mr. Hartnett, you're Mr. Haynes?
Yes.
Can you spell your name for me?
George, George, Haynes, Haines.
And Mr. Gardner, you're gonna be testifying also?
Correct.
You all raise your right hands, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Conchita, we're gonna swear all of you who may be testifying. So, Dr. Braun, are you gonna testify or just your mother?
I think my mother as the owner of the property.
Okay, very good. So, Conchita, Marty, George, and Eric, will you all and Michelle, all raise your hands and be sworn by order. Thank you.
Try again. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay?
Okay, thank you. So, again,
So the public notice of this hearing was advertised in the Reading Eagle on May 24th and May 31st of 2023. That same notice was mailed to all adjacent property owners located within at least 300 feet of the subject property on May 16th of 2023 at approximately 9:30 a.m. And it was posted at the subject property on May 18th of 2023 at approximately 10 a.m. I have affidavits to confirm that testimony.
thank you. And do we also have, yes, we're gonna have those marked, Michelle, and do you have other exhibits to be marked as part of the borough exhibits for the hearing?
I do, an email from George Haynes dated Wednesday, May 10th, 2023, waiving his right to having the conditional use hearing within 60 days of the application being submitted, as well as an email from Eric Garten dated Monday, May 1st, 2023, requesting an amendment to the conditional use application to include 2 additional sections. Section 504D.6.A regarding parking for apartments, and section 505D regarding modifications to requirements of section
Sorry, what was the last one?
505D regarding modifications to requirements of section 504D. Additionally, I have a memo dated April 26th of 2023. Actually, there should be an updated one. Hold on 1 second. Apparently I didn't update it. But a memo dated April 26th of 2023 addressed to Borough Council, which summarizes the application and the relief that's being requested. I can also enter the application and exhibits unless the applicant intends to do so.
Why don't we have you, Michelle, enter those documents into the record?
Okay. Additionally, there is the application requesting a conditional use hearing, as well as the deed for the subject property, a special warranty deed. And then also included was a parking needs letter report, as well as an economic analysis, for which council can consider granting the conditional use approval.
Very good. Do you have any objection, Mr. Haynes, to the admission of all those documents that Ms. Bear has reviewed into the record?
I do not.
Mr. Deutschman, do you have any objection to those documents that Ms. Bear has just reviewed being entered into the record of the hearing?
No, do not.
Ms. Braun, do you have any objection to those documents being entered into the record? Okay, thank you. Before we begin with the applicant's testimony, I just want to talk a little bit about how this is going to proceed. The proposal, as you've already heard, is for 30 residential apartments on the lot which is located at the corner of Park Road and Penn Avenue. Under the borough zoning ordinance, at that location, under the redevelopment area overlay regulations, the apartments would not need any hearing by this council if there was ground level retail or other non-residential uses included as part of the project. The regulations provide that if an applicant shows that there is a reason why they can't provide the non-residential uses on the ground floor, that through this conditional use hearing process, the Borough Council may approve, if it finds that information persuasive, a building that contains only residential apartments without ground floor commercial or retail. So that is one of the 2 issues that is before the council today, is whether or not it is permissible to proceed with a project that does not have ground floor retail or commercial. The second issue that is before the council is the number of off-street parking spaces required for the apartment use. The ordinance says that 1.5 spaces are required per apartment, and if they presented a plan that provided 1.5 spaces per apartment, they wouldn't need any approval from Borough Council. But the ordinance says that the number of off-street parking spaces, along with other dimensional regulations, can be adjusted by the Borough Council through a conditional use hearing if there is, again, a report presented that is persuasive as to why they cannot meet the off-street parking regulation. And the ordinance lists some of the factors that should be taken into consideration in determining whether or not it is acceptable to not provide all of the off-street parking that is required. So in this case, they're proposing to provide 32 instead of 45 off-street parking spaces for the 30 apartments. So those are the legal issues that the Borough Council needs to decide as part of today's hearing. The way we're going to proceed will be to have the applicant present testimony on the issues that I've just described. We will then allow those of you who have been admitted as parties to this proceeding to ask questions of each of the witnesses or the applicant. And then council will ask questions of the applicant's witnesses. After the questioning and testimony of the applicant is completed, I will then turn to Mr. Deutschman and ask him if he has any testimony that he wishes to present. And then the applicant and the council can ask you questions. Also, Ms. Braun can ask you questions. After we've completed Mr. Deutschman's part of the presentation, then I'll turn to Ms. Braun. You will be able to present testimony, and you will be required to answer any questions from the applicant, Mr. Deutschman, or council. So that's the way we're going to proceed. So I just want to make it clear that when we are doing the testimony of the applicant, I'm going to ask for questions from Mr. Deutschman and Ms. Braun, but not at that point for you to present your own testimony. That will be a little bit later in the proceeding. Okay, are there any questions about the process that will occur today? When we complete all of the testimony from all the parties, we will close the record, and council will have the option at that point of making a decision immediately, or they may ask to recess into an executive session where they can ask me legal questions, and they could then potentially come back with some decision after the executive session, or it is possible that they could delay the announcement of any decision. Council has the right to take up to 45 days from the hearing date to express its decision and issue a written form of that decision. Again, are there any questions about that process? All right, so with that introduction, I'm going to turn to Mr. Haynes and ask you if you could begin to present your position on this application.
Sure. Thank you. Would it be helpful for everybody if I did a brief overview of the project and then how we came to determine why what we have proposed is the best use for the project?
That sounds like a good way.
Is that a good idea? Okay, great. So, the Wrangler Lot, as it was referred to by Mr. Hartman, is a just under 0.6 acre parcel at the northwest corner of the intersection of Penn Avenue and Park Road. Its current use today is a surface parking lot. We acquired the parcel as part of the acquisition of the entire VF campus back in 2016. The existing conditions today, as I said, surface parking lot. So, as Mr. Hartman said, there are two reasons that we're here today. The first of which is to prove that having a commercial use on the first floor of a residential apartment building is not viable, okay? And it comes down to the following. As we had previously pursued a retail tenant for the property, we had encountered resistance from Pennsylvania Department of Transportation that they had strongly discouraged, maybe even a little bit stronger than that, had prohibited a left out or a left in to Court Lane, okay? And then therefore the access to the property, okay? So,
Mr. Haynes, may I
yes.
interrupt? What is Court Lane? We want to make sure we give words to your explanation so it gets into our...
Absolutely. It is two-way traffic road that runs east to west between Park Road and Reading Avenue to the west. It is a private road, I believe.
Does the borough maintain that alley, Michelle?
It is an alley, and yes, we would maintain it, but it's not a road, it's an alley.
It's an alley, okay? Regardless, the access by a retail tenant, the commercial use, okay, would be to access Court Lane, Court Alley, okay? Take a right, that traffic would be prohibited to take a left onto Park Road and go north. Alternatively, coming from the south, if you're on Penn Avenue, you could not come from Penn Avenue, go northbound on Park Road, and then take a left onto Court in order to access the retail or commercial use. Therefore, it becomes more than challenging and practically impossible to solicit commercial use or commercial interest for that kind of space.
Mr. Haynes,
Yes.
just to put this into context,
Yes,
are you describing communications that occurred with PennDOT about obtaining a highway occupancy permit?
that's exactly right.
And is a highway occupancy permit required from PennDOT in order to develop the property in question?
That's exactly right, it is. Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
That's fine. Therefore, just to further show the impracticality of that use, given that restriction from PennDOT, if we go one more slide, that show. I put in yellow here from the southbound, or from the southern Penn Avenue corridor, all traffic would have to come over to Reading Avenue, go north on Reading, all the way eastbound on Court Lane in order to access the property. Alternatively, if you're trying to exit the property and go north, instead of taking a left out onto Park Road, you would also have to go westbound on Court Lane, northbound on Reading Avenue, eastbound all the way down Hill Avenue, to then take your left at a signalized intersection and go north on Park Road. So based on my company's experience and what we do, being able to solicit tenant interest on a retail or commercial basis, given those restrictions and the restriction ultimately imposed by PennDOT, would make it highly improbable to ever lease that space.
Mr. Haynes, just again, to put this into context, the documents that you've been showing the council on the screen, are they also included in the materials that were submitted as part of your application package?
I don't believe that they have been, but
I think they were.
This was, this version you're currently looking at was just sent to me this morning, a little
Okay.
before 8 a.m.
Alright, it
There was
looks
a
familiar to
previous
me.
version of this that was included, in what was sent out to council.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you for that explanation. So, if there's something new that Mr. Haynes has delivered to you this morning, can we have that included in the record, if it was not part of the application?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I just want to make sure that we, all
Current document on the screen, which I will send you after.
right, thank you. All right, so, please proceed.
and therefore, based on what I've discussed previously, this is a concept rendering of what we have proposed. As Mr. Hartman described, a 30-unit apartment building. We can move through these quickly. That based on the design and the high-end nature of the development, we're attempting to tie into the neighborhood and the neighbors. This is a view from the west looking eastbound on Penn Avenue, again trying to tie into the architectural nature of the neighborhood. More straight on from the south looking north to the project. And this was an engineer plan that we had provided previously. It's just a sample body of work that Equus Capital Partners has developed previously. One apartment project in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, one in Newtown Square, Delaware County, one in Chalfont, Bucks County and a high-rise apartment project that we're developing in Conshohocken currently. One point that I had made to economic development previously, again, these apartments, this 30-unit apartment job, we feel is in great need and great demand locally. This is some of the statistics that we use at Equus Capital Partners to show in the entire area, apartment projects of 50 units or greater. There are only 4,400 apartment units in this area. Vacancy rate of 1.6%. That is that is an unhealthily low vacancy rate. Very, very tight conditions, which says to us that the market is demanding more apartments and would be very receptive to a delivery of 30 units. That was back in March, a presentation we made to the economic development. We actually ran it this morning. Vacancy has dropped now to 1.1%. And then furthermore, if you take one more click, Michelle, okay, this is, keep going one more. This is a further review of apartments that were built more recently than the year 2000. So anything built in the last 23 years, okay? There are less than 500 apartments in this entire area that have been built in the last 23 years, and the vacancy rate is less than 1%. That's not healthy. And again, to have a 30-unit apartment project for this area, new construction, high-end finishes, we think it'd be a big benefit to everyone. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Will Mr. Garten be talking more about the parking, or, correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yes.
And also, I'm gonna wanna hear more about how you anticipate handling the access with an apartment-only project. Is that something Mr. Garten's gonna talk about, or Mr. Haynes? Because I guess my question is, do you have the same access constraints with the apartment-only project that you discovered with the original retail user that began the discussions with Penn Avenue?
I think if we go back, Mr. Hartman, I appreciate you asking that question. Go one more, Michelle, if you would.
The other way.
Forward, yep. Right, so 2 parts to your question. Let me answer the first part, and that's with regard to the parking ratio. We proposed 32 parking spaces for a 30-unit apartment project, a ratio of just over 1 parking space per unit. We have seen a drastic reduction in parking needs for apartment projects like these in the greater kind of southeastern and south central Pennsylvania area, as well as other markets that we cover throughout the United States. We have seen parking ratios historically be in the range of 1.5 spaces per unit, drop down now lower due to, especially for a project like this, when you have walkability, when you have a more urban walkable environment, residents at this project, I can only assume would walk to major employers such as Reading Hospital, UGI, and others in the area. We also believe that this project and the parcel directly benefits from bike lanes, bike accessibility, and the bus service that runs right past the project. So we think that those are unique benefits to the project and speak to the fact that a 1 space per unit ratio is appropriate. As for accessibility, we do believe that there's a distinction, Mr. Hartman, between retail, commercial uses, and residential. If a resident is staying at the project, sleeping at the project on a daily basis, their inclination and habit forming to work their way to Reading Avenue and then down Court Lane is much more appropriate, and something that, based on the quality of construction, the quality of the project, that is not a insurmountable hurdle for us to lease the apartment project. Having a one space per unit ratio and having that access is just fine. Alternatively, on a commercial side, if customers going to that commercial establishment, that retail establishment, see the business on that corner and cannot access it quickly, they tend to bypass that business and find something that's easier to access.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. With that, I'm going to ask if Mr. Deutschman has any questions for Mr. Haynes.
Yes, I do.
Again, this is the time for questions, not for your testimony. I just want to remind you.
This is just
Please
questions.
proceed. Go ahead.
Number one, when you were speaking about the possibility of putting in the retail, how many square foot were you going to put in that lot?
I believe it was about 3,000 square feet. 3,000.
3,072.
Okay.
Well, you're not going to get, certainly not going to get the return on investment that you're going to get from the apartments, is that right? I mean, was that a factor in?
It was not at all, no.
Yeah.
It was not at all. I mean, take a look at the square footage of the Wawa that we developed, that was highly, that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. You say that there's ample parking. You say this is an upscale development. Normally in an upscale development, even if two people live in, how many bedrooms, by the way, how many bedrooms are these apartments going to have?
I believe it's 30 apartments. There we go, thank you. 2 beds, 10, 14, it's about 50-50. So
50-50.
figure 45 bedrooms.
And you're saying that in a 2-bedroom apartment, they're gonna have 1 car? But that's not the situation, I think, in Berks County. That's my opinion.
Okay. We've built other communities with
Yes.
ratios far, consistent with this ratio,
What
which that ratio suffices just fine. I could point to apartment developments, the highest end apartment developments with no parking ratio, 0 parking spaces,
New York City
well, and beyond.
and beyond. But the thing is, if you have parking, 1 car for every, I don't think that's gonna be enough. And is there a possibility that you could add parking to the 31 that you have, considering that you own the property next door?
We do not own the property next door.
You do not.
No, we don't. We do not. But the property you're referring to is north of Court Lane, is that?
Where the former outlets was.
No, we do not own that anymore. No, we've sold that.
Well, do you feel that, where these people, what's your opinion of where these people are gonna park if they only have 1 space and they have 2 cars? Where would they park? I mean, somebody in the building, would you feel that somebody in the building might have 2 cars, but they're entitled to 1 space, so where would they park? Where's the spillover? You talk about other projects that you have only 1 per apartment, 1 space per apartment.
Right.
But is there a spillover in that particular community? Or what are these people doing with, for cars? Cars are a big thing
Do
today.
we have on-street parking in that area? Yes.
Yeah, but it's the same Arm Street parking.
Right.
that The whole Penn Avenue has, the thing that you were showing as neighbors to
Right.
your proposed development. Those individuals have no parking to speak of on their particular properties. In other words, all those, the 900 block, all those buildings
Right.
basically have parking barely for the people that work there or own the building. And the public parking on the streets very limited. And,
Mr. Deutschman, again, you're gonna have an opportunity to
Okay,
testify.
okay.
We'll
no,
get
I was gonna
question.
make that a question also.
Make it a question.
Okay. Do you feel that some of those people would park on Penn Avenue in the 900 block?
They may. They may also park in the 1,000 spaces that are largely vacant after the hour of 6 p.m. on the east side of Park Avenue. You have an entire neighborhood where a theoretical car may find a space.
Do you feel that possibly the people that are occupying that property that you used to own, do you feel that those people will be concerned that if cars are left there overnight and during the day?
Yeah, I can't speculate on their feelings.
Well, I can't.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other questions at this time?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Braun, do you have any questions for Mr. Haynes?
I really was concerned also.
I'm sorry,
with this
Mrs.
question.
Brown, I can barely hear you.
Yeah,
Keep your voice up for me.
sure. That was part of my question also. Because the parking is a problem all around there. That alley already has so much traffic both ways that when collectors and other services have to go to those buildings, to all those businesses, sometimes it's a problem. There is not a stop sign, there is not a slow sign or anything, so people drive there 60 miles per hour sometimes, which is dangerous because there are a lot of businesses there with people coming and going, okay, to the buildings. The parking spaces that they are providing, they are not going to be enough, considering all the units that they are going to have. Because 2 or 3 people can live in one apartment, and they will also have cars. Where are they going to park? Because in Penn Avenue is limited.
Do you have a question, Ms. Braun?
In Park Road, they cannot park. In the alley, they cannot park. In Hill Road, they cannot park. So
You have to answer a
that-
question. You can't testify. You have to answer a question.
what is the additional parking going to be? That's right. We
So,
do have signs, patients only, handicap only, etc. But still, it's a hassle sometimes
okay.
in our building.
So your question to Mr. Haynes
Yeah, they do need more parking.
is where will the cars park? I guess. And again, I think it's the same question Mr. Deutschman already asked you.
We believe that there's sufficient parking at the project as proposed.
Okay. So, do you have any questions other than the one you already asked, Ms. Braun? Okay, no additional questions at this time, thank you. I'm gonna turn to council and ask council if you have any questions for Mr. Haynes, thank you.
Mr. Haynes, are you going to assign a parking spot per apartment, or is it gonna be open parking spots?
We could, it's, with 30 units, it's a manageable number, so we certainly could. Yeah,
And then divvy them out if someone doesn't equal?
that's right.
Mr. Haynes, have you explored parking overflow options with any of your neighbors?
We did in fact, we talked to the owner of the property on the north side of Court Lane about potential overflow parking. It becomes complicated for the potential redevelopment of that parcel okay, and their future intentions, and if there's a long-term requirement for them to provide overflow options to us. Anything with regard to a long-term obligation for overflow parking will very likely come at a big price, a big cost, ground rent or an upfront cost. My concern with the development of this project is that it is expensive to build. It's expensive to build something of this quality, and that any extra financial cost to the project will make it incrementally less viable that we could develop in the future. Does that answer your question, Mr. James?
Yes, thank you.
So just to clarify, you don't
Yes.
presently have any agreement in place for additional parking?
We do not, Mr. Hartley, no.
Are there opportunities or restrictions with respect to the property you've already developed that might allow for bleed over of your apartment tenants to use that property before, after, or during the day?
There are no existing agreements in place with those properties, though.
So to follow up on that,
Yes,
specifically to identify like the orthodontist, the
Yes.
orthopedic operation
right.
and all the other contiguous operations would
Right.
be accessible parking for these folks as well.
No, what I'm saying is that there's no agreement in place that would provide us overflow parking on those properties.
Provide you access.
Correct.
Would there be no access then unless you were able to accommodate these folks?
That is correct.
And any sort of downsizing of the project to allow more parking makes your cost analysis not viable.
It really does, yes. That's a good point.
Any other questions from council? Is there anything further you want to say at this time, Mr.
I
Haynes?
do not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a
Oh,
question?
You're not a party, and, Mr. Jadakin, my intention would be to allow public comment, but not questioning. So at the end of this hearing, I'll ask if there's public comment for individuals who are not parties to the
I
proceeding.
think it would have been a good question, but it's fine.
All right, Mr. Clerk, you've been sworn, and this is your time to present testimony to council.
Great, thank you.
Can you tell us who you are?
Yes, Eric Garten, professional engineer from the company Gilmore and Associates. We're the engineer who prepared the engineered sketch plan that you saw on a couple of the slides, as well as a May 23rd, 2023 short report just talking about the reasons we believe that there's ample parking on the site. So the borough code requires 1.5 spaces per unit for a total of 45. The borough code also provides a mechanism to justify why we wouldn't necessarily need that many spaces. And I know sitting in the room here, most of us can't believe that you wouldn't have a car per person, right? Because we're of a different generation, and I know I'm younger than some folks in the room. But 3 kids living in a single-family home, I have 2 cars. But as George testified earlier, apartment buildings today and people that are living in these types of apartment buildings are generally younger, don't have kids, so they don't have the need for multiple cars. Our letter walks through several points of why we believe there's enough parking. We're talking about overflow parking. There's overflow parking in close proximity to the site along Penn Avenue. The site is in a close proximity to businesses, the medical school, and other places that these folks can easily walk to. Number 3, the ordinance talks about providing non-vehicular alternatives like bike racks. We are proposing to have bike racks on the site as suggested by the ordinance as a reason that we can reduce some on-site parking requirements. Post-pandemic, again, a lot of people are working from home. I know some of the businesses are coming back, but not at the same rate that they were before the pandemic. So again, although there's some 2 bedrooms here, that could easily be a 1-bedroom with an office for these folks. It's the way that people work today is different than it was before. Caddy corner to our site is the bus stop, which gets residents here access all over the region. And again, I know that most of us in the room wouldn't think about getting in an Uber to go to the grocery store and then Ubering back, but a lot of people that are living in apartment buildings are doing those sorts of things. The only other thing I would add, the borough code provides an incentive that if you provide structured parking, that instead of 1.5 spaces per unit, you can go down to 1.2 spaces per unit. Michelle, if you could just go back to the last picture we were looking at with George. In speaking with the borough manager, we had a discussion, are we providing structured parking? Some of our parking spaces, the ones on the south side, are actually under the building. But in an abundance of caution, structured parking is parking spaces on top of parking spaces. But if you give me a moment here, if you were to consider the structured parking, because there is a structure above the parking, and we only had to do 1.2 spaces, per the borough code, you are encouraging less on surface parking to make the area, more beautiful without just seas of parking.
I'm sorry. You lost me on that.
Sorry.
Try and slow down a little bit.
I apologize. The borough code, I'll start again. Borough code provides a mechanism to reduce the amount of parking required for residential apartment buildings. And that mechanism is if they did structured parking, which would be, talking with the borough manager, parking spaces on top of other parking spaces, a parking garage, if you will. Although we do not have parking on top of parking, we have the building on top of almost half of our parking spaces. So the borough code talks about that reduction in parking spaces in that scenario for 1.2 spaces per unit. If you do the math on 30 units, we would be required 36 spaces. We're providing 32 spaces. So now instead of being 13 short, we're only 4 short. Again, in abundance of caution, we didn't consider the structured parking, but we're talking about 4 spaces. Per your ordinance, not based on people's opinions of how many cars different units are gonna need. The borough's ordinance, which contemplates this exact scenario for apartment buildings. So, that's my testimony, as to the reasons why we believe the development is proposed with 30 spaces or 32 spaces for 30 units is more than sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Garten. Mr. Deutschman, do you have any questions for Mr. Garten?
Yes, I do. Structurally, can you add more parking spaces to this building right now? Just curious. Structurally,
Can we,
Can you
fit
add
more
more
spaces
parking
on
spaces?
the site?
yes.
We could certainly put spaces that would have to back up onto Court Lane, but generally the borough does not like to have parking spaces back onto a
Can you
a
add
street.
spaces
Wait,
to the
Mr.
existing?
Deutschman, let me explain something. I have to get every word he
Okay.
says, so wait until he's done,
Yeah.
okay?
Please don't override each other. Thank you. So, Mr. Deutschman, Audrey, did you get Mr. Deutschman's question?
I got the question, but I didn't get the end of the answer. But generally, the borough does not like to have,
That was me. So the
Yes.
borough does not like to have parking spaces back up into whether it be a public street or an alley that's maintained.
If the borough allowed that, could you do it?
Yeah, certainly.
I don't know if you have the geometry here to get ramps and build a structure.
So no, George, we're not talking about structured parking, we're just talking about surface parking, that we have space that we could provide some extra spaces along Court Lane. I think you're using the word structure different than potentially I'm
No,
interpreting.
the question I asked you was, can you add to the structured parking? Can
No.
you change the design to add to the structured parking?
We cannot provide additional levels of parking on the site. We can, as we
Based-
just talked about, if you give me a second to finish, as we talked about, we could fit some spaces along Court Lane.
Okay, that's
Show
one,
where
and
you
how many
fit those
spaces?
spaces.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I'm out of the, sorry, I'm kind of hearing, sorry.
how many spaces would that provide?
So likely you'd want to have angled parking there. And again, this would require the borough to approve that scenario, and that approval is not necessarily part of the conditional use approval, because that's the subdivision land development. ordinance,
It's actually zoning ordinance as well.
and it's
Separate
zoning. Okay, thank you for the borough manager slash zoning officer slash.
That's not my question. My
Okay.
question.
So, yes, it could be provided, the borough would have to approve it, I believe if it's in the zoning ordinance, we would need to seek a variance to allow that
And
configuration.
how many more spaces approximately would that provide?
I think we could roughly get in 10 to 15, just ballparking it.
It's still, okay.
I'm not saying it's necessarily a safe condition to have people backing out into the alley. No. It's the difference between whether you can fit it and whether it's a good idea.
Could you make it a good idea?
If we did parallel parking spaces, it would be half of the number I just said.
Would parallel spaces be safer than?
They would certainly be safer, yes, because you can see in your rearview mirror whether people are coming up and down the aisle, as opposed to when you pull in directly.
Would they be placed in that the green block area next to,
Correct, yes.
Court Lane?
Bordering Court Lane, I'm pointing to the screen at the northern part of the site there.
I'm
you probably
sorry,
get-
I'm sorry, I didn't get trained.
I'm pointing to the northern part of our site along Court Lane in the green area.
you probably get about 3 on each side?
Yeah, so I said it was 10 to 15 before, about half of that, 5 or 6. We'd have to, the specific number, I'm not positive. The borough engineer is roughing out 5, what the records show.
Where would a visitor park coming to this structure?
Well, if there's an open parking space, they're gonna park in the open parking space. Unless they're designated per unit, which is a possibility. If they're not, they're parking on the street. As we talked about earlier, there's certainly plenty of parking lots in the area that they could park in.
Don't you feel that's a little like the Wild West? I mean,
I
if
mean,
somebody's paying, just asking you a question, if somebody's paying the kind of rent that I think you're gonna be getting for this, they are entitled to a parking space, and they are entitled for people to come and visit, aren't they?
Sure.
So do you still feel that that's an appropriate amount of parking spaces for this kind of a structure?
I do.
You do as an individual?
So
Or
I'm
somebody
testifying
working-
as a professional engineer, I'm not testifying as a party goer to this building.
I believe I disagree, but thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Deutschman?
The only question, would you be kind enough to show me where this structured parking is?
So again, pointing at the screen here, this is the building.
Right.
These are the individual parking spaces that are underneath some of the units on the second floor
How
there.
many levels is that?
How many levels is the building?
No, the parking structure.
Just one.
Can another level be added?
No. It cannot.
Structurally impossible. I'm not familiar with
Given the
this
small
structure.
site, I don't think you have enough room with ramps to get it up there. Not to mention it would be astronomically expensive for just a few extra parking spaces. If you look at parking garages, they are hundreds and hundreds of cars.
You have to build, units over those parking.
Yes, yeah, the whole thing, and the whole building would have to get taller, and then you would be violating the borough's height restrictions potentially.
That was never proposed to the borough, correct?
I'm sorry, it was never proposed what?
Raising the structure's height was never proposed to the borough. Is that correct?
No, it was not.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Deutschman?
Not at the moment.
Thank you. Ms. Braun, do you have any questions for Mr. Gart?
I have one question, because he already asked questions that I had, okay? Visitors, et cetera, they need to park.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mrs. Brown. Try and keep your voice up for me.
Okay, that part of my questions, Mr. Dutchman already had, okay? But I have another one. Between 9:15 and our building, 9:31, there is another building with a barn there. Is that going to stay there, that barn?
That is not on our property,
That is
so
not
I
your
cannot
problem.
speak for that.
Okay, okay. So that building is going to stay there, and,
I cannot answer that question because
yeah,
we do not own
okay,
that
no,
property.
that's what I wanted to know. So that building is going to be there still? That was my question. Okay, yeah,
The underground parking. Is underground parking an option to do a level of parking?
Similar issues, right? You need to ramp down to get underground, and there's just not enough room on the site to get down there.
Any other questions, Ms. Braun?
no, more or less concerns, but no questions.
We're gonna give you an opportunity to provide testimony, okay? Does council have any questions for Mr. Gordon?
It's hard to determine the size of that. How much space is that behind that green area currently now? How much?
So if a parking space is 18 to 20 feet in length, it's about 18 to 20
Okay.
feet there.
So I
Plus or
mean,
minus.
so I guess that'll be part of the question we have later, that why would we not allow that?
The
Some
zoning
sort of
ordinance,
diagonal parking?
the zoning ordinance prohibits any parking that would back onto a public street or alley because it would encourage accidents. I mean, if you're backing blind into a street or alley, you can't always see what's coming.
But if it's diagonal parking, because at this point,
Diagonal would still be backing in. Parallel would be the safest configuration in this scenario.
And your dimension for a parallel spot, I believe, is actually 10 by 20. 9
Yeah.
by 18 is your typical
so
standard space.
based on parallel, you can get how many?
I'm going to trust the borough engineer here and say that it's 5.
But is 5 not better than none?
Yes.
Jim, could you get on both sides
Well,
or just one?
just on the south side, because there's already parking on the north side for the other parking lot.
Yeah, just on the south, on their property.
Right.
Meaning in these,
But you
Meaning in the
could-
green area on this exhibit, you could put parallel spaces.
But that would require a variance? Or the parallel parking would require a variance?
I don't think we can eyeball that without actually seeing an engineered plan showing.
I
But
think
would,
it could be
would parallel
conditions
parking
council
spaces
could
require
apply.
variance?
One at a time.
Yeah, sorry. You wanna go?
I think that could be a condition that could be applied if the council so inclined as part of the decision.
It just, if the largest concern is parking, which obviously it is, and you can squeeze in 5 more, why not? I mean, it doesn't sound like it's gonna cost you guys more, in fact, you might not have a green area to maintain.
Well, a follow-up question is that green area related to any other zoning regulations such as lot coverage, impervious area limitations, things like that? Is there anything like that which is going to become a problem if the green area is reduced or eliminated?
So the site existing today is 100% impervious. So anything we do is reducing the amount of impervious there. So I don't want to speak for the borough, but I don't believe that constitutes any kind of zoning issue from an impervious coverage standpoint.
No, as long as you weren't using that towards your open space requirements, which,
I believe the open space requirements are negligible in this, so.
Okay. Any other council questions of Mr. Gorton? I'm gonna turn to Michelle and Jim McCarthy. Before we move on to Mr. Deutschman and Ms. Braun's testimony, are there any questions that you, Michelle, or Jim, as borough engineer, wish to ask of Mr. Garten or Mr. Haynes?
I have none.
Would that, well, actually, I have one. Would that be a problem with, Equus if council wanted that parallel parking put out there on the south side of court along your frontage?
It would not be a problem.
Okay. Whether we could get 4, 5, 6, whatever, spaces up there, whatever ends up fitting.
Okay, related to that, Mr. Garten and Mr. Haynes, have you had any discussions with PennDOT so far about an HOP for this apartment development?
We have not.
Okay,
No.
and the plan that's on the screen right now shows an access directly onto Park, just a little bit to the, I guess, south of Court intersection with Park, If you were not able to get approval from PennDOT to have a direct access on the park, and your sole access was off of Court, and if that HOP required you to go down to Reading and come up Court as part of your HOP for apartment access, would those conditions be something that would be acceptable to you and you would still go forward with the project?
Yes.
Thank you.
On that note, and if that requirement were enforced by PennDOT, would those additional spaces that you just talked about interfere with that ingress egress at that point?
So the parallel parking spaces on Court are not on a PennDOT road, so PennDOT couldn't actually dictate the configuration of this driveway and those parking spaces. They could just dictate kind of how people access the site in and out.
So it wouldn't be a problem.
No.
Any follow-up, Jim?
Just one, why do you need a driveway on Park?
I'm sorry?
Why do you need a driveway on Park? Can't, because it's right in, right out, isn't it Court gonna achieve the same thing? And then with them being that close to one another, doesn't seem to be much of a benefit. Other than now we have another driveway, an access point between Court and the signal, and that access point's actually in the designated turning lane section. So I didn't know if it was, what's the benefit of that, of going to that, other than the fact of having head trauma of dealing with PennDOT for 9 months?
We actively try to limit head trauma with PennDOT.
Right.
I would tell you, Mr. McCarthy, that it is a conceptual plan. It's an engineered and architecturally developed plan, but it is conceptual. That's something that your point is well taken, I understand.
So again, if the borough was inclined to say, we don't want that driveway on Park, we want all the access off the Court, would that negatively affect your project?
We would still proceed with the project, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Put spaces in that entrance too.
Not with backing in and out, no.
Just to further the testimony, if we were to remove the access on Park Road, I don't believe there's enough room to put parking spaces in there that would not be within the borough's public right of way. Yes.
Is there a restriction in the zoning ordinance of how close off-street parking has to be to a right-of-way?
That's what I was looking through, but also trying to pay attention to the testimony at the same time.
5 feet, I think. It would appear that there is normally such a restriction, and I'm not sure on the east end of that green zone how many spaces you get in. Maybe 1, 2 perhaps at most.
We don't, but it's our public right away. It's our public right away.
Oh, right, no.
That's what I'm saying.
10 feet from the street right away or lot line. So, I mean, you are gonna need a variance to put parking in these green areas. Yeah,
Even on street parallel.
yeah. All off-street parking areas and access drives. So we're considering this non-residential and that it's not single-family, two-family,
What
semi.
if they dedicated additional right-of-way to the borough along Court and made it public?
It could just be overflow parking that we don't necessarily have 100% control over.
On-street parking.
We could build on-street parking for the borough that we wouldn't have exclusive rights to use, but our residents could, if it was open, use those spaces. That would get us out of the variance,
Now
right?
we're getting creative, yes.
Okay.
So that would, just to clarify, that would bring your 32 plus 5. You'd be at 37 off-street spaces.
Well, that's
We'd still be at 32 off-street, we would potentially be providing 5 on-street parking spaces that are not technically part of our,
Yes,
so that we can get out of the.
Dedicating that.
yes.
Yeah.
That's assuming that the criteria of that qualifying as structured parking, which,
I only testified to the structured parking just to give you the sense that your ordinance already talks about 1.5 spaces per unit being way more than is needed.
might be a stretch, that's considered structured parking. parking.
We're not gonna consider it structure.
Again, and your borough manager didn't, I just wanted to provide that for some context to the conversation about how much parking an apartment building really needs.
Good try.
You see how creative we can get out there.
With that, I think we're ready to move on to testimony from the other parties. Unfortunately, Mr. Deutschman has stepped out. I'm gonna start then with Ms. Braun and let Mr. Deutschman testify when he comes back. Ms. Braun, you have been sworn. You understand that means that you're required to give truthful testimony. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been sworn, you're required to give truthful testimony. This is your opportunity to tell the Borough Council what your concerns are.
Well, there are a number of them. We have to consider the snowplow.
I'm sorry, Miss.
The snowplow in winter time, trash, recycling, and all these services, okay? Because that alley has so much traffic, and it's very narrow. So we have to consider all these things,
That are necessary services.
because now the weather is beautiful, but in winter time can be really tricky sometimes with the snow and plowing and all that.
Right, where would the recycling containers be and the trash containers in this property? And how would these big trucks access the collection of all of these
Okay.
necessary?
Dr. Braun, would you like to be sworn and to testify?
No, I'm just helping my mother because she's a little hard of hearing and she has a very soft voice. So we're just kind of having discussions among ourselves. So I'm kind of trying to be part of her voice too. That's,
Okay.
yeah,
Well,
I think you have right, right?
Yeah.
I would feel more comfortable if we would just have you sworn and you can testify on behalf of your mother, if
Okay,
you wish.
sure,
Um,
sure.
All right, so Dr. Braun, can you give your full name for the record, please?
Yes, Maria Braun.
And you are the daughter of Conchita Braun?
Conchita Braun, who owns the property at 931.
And you operate a business on your mother's property, is that
And we
correct?
have a medical family practice office in that area. There's 2 rental units looking at Penn Avenue, and the medical office that looks to the
alley.
So we have our patient parking in the alley, the access in and out, our collection of trash and recycling.
Would you allow yourself to be sworn by the stenographer?
And the problems that we have.
Wait, Mr. Brown. I couldn't squeeze it in anywhere. Doctor, if you raise your
Yes.
hand, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give and the testimony you previously gave is sworn to the best of your ability?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
Okay.
set.
So now, continue with anything you wanted to share with us on behalf of yourself or your mother.
So yes, besides the parking situation, of course, with a lot of 2-bedroom units that you expect 2 to 3 people living in those units, with the transportation system in our town, unfortunately, is not that great with these medical students that are rotating in different hospitals and they have to come and go, they need a car, So there's the concern about parking outside of the property where these tenants will be able to access, parking. And then again, the necessary services like trash recycling and snow plowing in this small space.
So what is your concern about those services? Is it about the volume of traffic on the alley? Is that
Is
your
the
concern?
traffic on, of course, yes, the traffic on that limited alley space that's the access point to this property for everything, right? Deliveries, tenants, visitors, and all the services that are needed in an apartment complex.
Okay.
And it is already crowded, and it is already a hassle.
So, thank you, Dr. Braun. Is there anything else that you wish to testify to?
No,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. All right, now, Mr. Deutschman, I'm sorry we jumped you because you were not here when we started with the other parties' testimony, but now is your opportunity. You've been sworn, you understand that, and this is your opportunity to give testimony. Please proceed.
I'd like to thank council for giving us the opportunity to come here and express ourselves and be part of the hearing. And also, I'd like to mention that the lack of the people who own property and have businesses on 900 Penn Avenue is amazing, but I can understand their frustration of not coming to the meeting because they felt helpless that nothing was going to be done and this project would go ahead. We have, Edward Jones is one of the tenants that we have at 918. We have had them there for 15 years. They have been actively seeking another space. Primarily, the reason is when people come to them, they cannot find parking spaces at certain times of the day. Now, there's certain times of the day they can, but this is also, we don't have a 30 apartments on the corner and 30 parking spaces. My feeling is, I have no problem with the building. My feeling is that that's inadequate parking for 2023. It just doesn't happen. We have 3 apartments, for instance, and there are 4 cars for each tenant. And if that's the ratio, that's not going to work there. And we had other tenants before that had 2 cars in 2 spaces, 2 different apartments. So I think it's going to be a very difficult situation. It's the old story of trying to get 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag. This is not adequate for what they're proposing, and this is my opinion. It's not adequate for the amount of units and the amount of people. And to add that to 900 block of Penn, you're going to have a lot of little businesses that are going to be very negatively affected. And I think that's something I'd like council to take into consideration, that these people have been here for a very long time, and this is their livelihood. And I think it's going to be negatively affected by this particular situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deutschman. I want to give Mr. Haynes the opportunity to ask any questions that he may have of both Dr. and Conchita Braun and of Mr. Deutschman regarding the testimony that they just provided. Do you have any questions for them?
I do not. I have no questions.
All right, thank you. Does council have any questions for the Brauns or for Mr. Deutschman? I see no indication of that. So at this point, what I would like to do is to admit into the record all of the exhibits that Michelle presented at the beginning and the additional documents that she reported that had been delivered this morning. So all those documents will be admitted into the record, and we will close the testimony at this point. And at this time, I'm going to turn to council and say you have a couple of options. One is that someone can make a motion regarding a decision on the hearing that we've just received testimony on, or if you wish, we can recess and have an executive session. Oh, I'm sorry, public comment. Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. I can't read lips, but all right. I did say that at the end of the testimony, we would allow public comment, and I've been reminded of that. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Jadick, who is in the audience and is eager to offer public comment. So
Well,
please proceed.
not eager is the question I wanted to ask was if there was a study made of the public parking around this building. it sounds that it hasn't been done. So they just focused on their own property, nothing around. And, I mean, if they could answer, that would be nice. The second, yes, I agree with Mr. Deutschman, and what's gonna happen here, I think most of the time, people are not gonna do the roundabout and do all that good stuff and just park on Penn Ave for an hour to, on Penn Avenue. And whether it's for an hour or two, or it's a visitor, and we already know that that area is full. And that's where I think that a study, because we've heard a lot of opinions, but I think a professional study would have helped. And I'm only thinking of the, which probably nobody here in the audience knows, of the eternal battle between the Met and their neighbors. That's exactly what happened. It's just close by. So either on Penn Avenue, or they're gonna park at Wall, and we're gonna start having arguments at the zoning hearing board because of this situation, because we're allowing this to happen. That's my concern, that this will not end here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jady. Is there anyone else in the audience who is not a party who wishes to speak? Go ahead, sir. Can you identify yourself?
Brad Deutschman?
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Brad Deutschman?
which one?
Brad Deutschman?
Deutschman, okay, sorry. Your
So-
address?
So just to put it in perspective, we've owned nine,
We're trying to identify where people are from. Audrey asked for your address. Can you,
oh, did you, 918 Penn Avenue.
Thank you.
go ahead, Mr. Deutsch.
So to put it in perspective, we've owned this property for close to 20 years. And I or he have never come to any of these meetings when other owners of other properties on 900 have asked for special exception on parking. So this is the only situation where we feel that is going to impact us in a negative way. Every other property owner has sought a special exception. It has not been an issue. We have never come in to talk about it, but clearly on this one, we feel it's going to be an issue. You know, we all provide off-street parking, or we try to, for the customers, and especially the employees. As he stated before, we have 3 apartments. They house 4 occupants in total, and every occupant has a car. So in our situation, it's a 1-for-1 ratio. And, you know, well, right, and plus the businesses that are downstairs. But, you know, right now, there seems to be an okay amount of parking on the street, and it seems to work. We did almost recently lose a tenant of almost 15 years that was seeking space off the 900 block specifically because of parking. So we talked to them, and you know, they did commit to another 2-year deal with us, which is normally what they do is 5-year deal. So clearly they have reservations as well. So just with that being said, you know, our concern is that there won't be enough parking on 900 block with this additional apartment building. It's an upscale apartment. They're going to have cars. They have the ability to own cars. And we feel that even in a single unit apartment, they could have 2 occupants, 2 cars. So, you know, we don't feel that this is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deutsch. Any other person present who wishes to make public comment? I see no indication of that. So, thank you for your public comments. Again, I'm going to return to council and say you have a couple of options for proceeding. One would be to have someone make a motion regarding the disposition of the application. Another would be to recess into an executive session where you could ask any legal questions you may have about how to proceed. Another option would be to recess this meeting until a future date, at which time you would announce a decision at that time. So how would, and again, we need to issue a decision within 45 days of the conclusion of the testimony today.
Chris,
So-
can we just go back? So there was some concerns, but we're not addressing whether the building can be there. That's not part of our purview at this point.
Well, the.
Project. It's a question.
Indirectly, I mean, in a sense, if you don't grant the conditional use relief that is sought today, it may impact whether this project occurs at all.
But it's relative to whether there's retail on the bottom or whether it's all
Yeah,
residential.
there are two
And
issues.
then the other is the parking.
Yeah, there are two issues. One is to allow this to be a residential only project without ground floor retail or commercial. That's issue one. And issue two is whether the off-street parking that's been offered is adequate, where the regulation requires 45 if it is strictly enforced.
So as part of our decision, if we were to request additional information about parking in that parallel parking, how would we go about having that as part of the decision-making
Well,
process?
again, if the direction the council were to go would be to have additional right-of-way along the alley dedicated to the borough as additional street right-of-way, and for the developer to construct parking spaces within that dedicated area, that would not change the off-street parking. You would still have 32 off-street parking spaces, but you could condition the application's approval on the developer constructing additional on-street parking in an area that is required to be dedicated to the borough parallel to the alley, and to provide as many spaces as the engineer could fit in that space.
But by making it part of the condition, it would alleviate some of the concern of
It
the
would,
residents.
I would say, substantially mitigate the deficiency in off-street parking.
So,
And not only would it address the off-street parking requirements, not only would it address parking for this project, but it also would generally provide additional public parking in the neighborhood.
so are we allowed to ask at this point if that condition were part of it, whether the developers would?
I think Mr. Haynes already said it, that he was okay with that, but can you confirm that, Mr. Haynes?
Confirm.
So then on the last condition, there's hearing the first part. It's part of our decision.
That we're going in to talk about now.
No, I mean,
No, our
the last,
previous
the previous.
Oh,
one
right.
With the apartments,
Yeah, that was
we
one of
addressed
the
that.
Well, we
as well.
didn't talk
Yeah.
about the
No,
putting
we
additional
addressed,
parking along there.
we made that as a part of the condition.
Right, okay, right.
Yeah, I think we will do an executive session and
Okay.
discuss what terms we might impose.
Everyone can stay, let's do that.
Yeah,
I'll second that.
or we go in the library like
What
we did
was the
last
motion?
time. That we go into executive session either here or in the library as we did.
Okay, we
last
have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those council members, yay, nay?
Yes,
Yay.
yes.
All right, so-
Everybody went at the same time.
Okay, so we're not ending the proceeding, we are just taking a recess. So we will come back into public session at the conclusion of this recess. Purpose of the recess is an executive session to have legal discussion about the application. So if council wishes to go into the library, the rest of you may remain here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That feels good enough.
That's awesome.
Is it okay with council?
Sure.
How long is that gonna be?
Anderson, any relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Ready?
And we're,
Oh, yeah, we need to
Yeah, I based it off of the letter you sent me for, Wrangler House. So I just wrote up like an address and document.
There is though, I'm spending too many hours.
Jim Jones told me you're still subsidizing. So I was there to
Oh, are they?
and that one also has to be two tests.
Yeah, I have that, yep.
So it is like the process.
Yeah. I know Chris asked, I guess he's done it for so he can give you
Sure, it's gonna be thick.
And what's even more fun is when you find conversations like these master addresses, because when you like come on better using, and then you go there and everything.
just like moving, but actually doing it in place. And having that inconvenience, that is, yeah, not fun.
Everybody waiting for you.
Yep.
Okay. We broke for executive session, make this decision. Now I'll call special council meeting back in session, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Hartman.
Thank you, President James. Based on the executive session discussion that council has just held, I'm going to recommend a motion to council for consideration by council. The motion that I'm recommending is to approve both of the conditional use requests that were submitted by the applicant, subject to a number of conditions. And I'm gonna ask Mr. Jim McCarthy, the borough engineer, to read those conditions.
Okay. The first condition should be a land development plan, including stormwater facilities, shall be reviewed and approved by the borough. The second, all impact studies, including traffic, shall be analyzed per the requirements of the subdivision land development ordinance.
I'm sorry, Mr. McCarthy, just hold on.
Sorry, okay.
Should be, shall be,
Analyzed per the requirements of the SALDO. Parking shall demonstrate on-site maneuvering to avoid backing up onto Court Alley. Court Lane, sorry, which is an alley. The maximum number of apartment units shall be 30. There shall be no driveway access to Park Road or Penn Avenue. All vehicular access should come off of Court Lane. Paved coverage is an existing nonconformity and has been reduced from existing conditions. The Borough Fire Chief shall review and comment on land development plans. The applicant shall provide evidence of DEP approval of the sewage facilities planning module or module exemption. The applicant shall provide evidence that the existing water supply has adequate capacity and pressure to meet both domestic and fire flow requirements. A sealed landscaping improvements plan that complies with section 504D1 shall be submitted to the borough, and a buffer is required per that section between the existing residential lots on the east of the property. Lighting plans with photometrics must show compliance with zoning ordinance section 605. Outdoor storage shall be shown, as well as location and screening of outdoor storage and trash enclosures per the SALDO and zoning ordinances. The applicant should add parallel parking spaces on the south side of Court Lane, the maximum amount that can fit. And the last condition will be the applicant will be responsible to obtain all applicable permits and approvals.
And I would just add, that the applicant shall comply with any other applicable borough regulations and state regulations. So that is the proposed motion. Now turn to council for any follow-up.
Does somebody wish to make a question on the motion?
I just want to clarify that the parallel parking spaces on the south side of Court Lane could be done by, at the developer's choice, by giving us dedicating the land or by zoning.
That's right.
Is that
Those
fair?
are two options for those spaces to be located in that area.
We can't grant the variance.
I think the concept of the right-of-way dedication, or the dedication to the boroughs.
Just wanted to get the developer.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so that additional statement should be made part of the conditions that would be part of the proposed motion.
And I'd make that motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No opposed, the ayes have it. Motion approves.
So the follow-up to that action by council is that there will be a written decision issued. We are legally required to issue that within 45 days. I anticipate it will take less than 45 days. We will mail copies of that to Ms. Braun and Mr. Deutschman and to the applicant. Any of the three of you have 30 days after the issuance of that written decision to make an appeal to the Berks County Court of Common Pleas if you are dissatisfied with that decision. So with that, I believe we have concluded all of our proceedings this morning, unless there's anyone who has any questions that require an answer. I'm looking around the room, I see no person indicating they have any questions. So at this point, we will close the hearing and you may adjourn the meeting.
Entertain a motion to adjourn? Second, motion second, all those in favor? Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.